Hey there, Streakers. I missed recording yesterday, but remember, I have not committed to this being an actual streak yet. I have been testing the waters because I've wanted to see what kind of dependencies are necessary for me to keep this as a streak. And I learned a couple things by missing yesterday's recording. So that's critical and important. Welcome. It's Sunday, September 24th, and this is Jeff Downs and the Streakin Podcast. You know, as you've been listening, that I reserve Sundays for spiritual streaks, or the streaks that I have in my life that keep Christ at the center of my life. I identified 6 things that keep Christ at the center of my life, and I did that almost 6 Sundays ago. And they were: read your scriptures every day, pray every day, go to church at least one time weekly, fast at least one time monthly, serve others, and finally, attend the temple. Had a really interesting conversation with, or a question from, one of the streakers out there who was curious about the religious beliefs that we have as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And she asked the question, what is the difference between church, going to church, and going to the temple? And she and I pursued in a conversation about that. And it was interesting what came about, because as I was explaining it, and I was appreciative to her question because it made me think about the temple and what it is that really is different between church and the temple. One of the YouTube personalities that I watch every so often is Pastor Jeff. And he runs a YouTube channel called Hello Saints. And on this channel, he is an evangelical Christian seeking to find out everything he can about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he interviews people. He goes to our church, our worship services. He's read the Book of Mormon. And what he does is talk about he compares evangelical Christian to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he talks about the differences and what those differences are. The reason I bring him up is in one of the episodes, he was talking about fellowshipping with other Christians. And that, when do you fellowship? And that there's fellowship with the saints, fellowship with your fellow Christians on a weekly basis at church. And as I was talking with this streaker, it hit me as his words came to my mind that the difference between church and temple for us is at church, we fellowship with other saints, with other Christians. We fellowship in a way that we're talking with each other. We're asking how each other are doing. We find out what it is that's been going on in the week, what they have coming up. All of these different things we find out. We fellowship together. We teach each other. We discuss the scriptures with one another. In our sacrament meeting services, which are main congregational service, we have each one of us take turns in presenting talks or giving information or doctrine about Jesus Christ and his church on the earth and his kingdom on the earth. It's fellowship because we are talking and teaching one with another. Now, in the temple, we are fellowshipping with God. In other words, we don't talk to one another in the temple. We may have pleasantries, but the purpose and the reason why we go is not to fellowship with each other, but it's to fellowship with God and to get close to and understand what it is he wants for our life. We make covenants that we're going to live a higher law, a higher order in order to be like him. We're striving diligently to be more charitable and to seek for and understand how it is we can be more charitable in our lives and live covenants or live in a way that is in concert with or in harmony with the way that God wants us to live. But in the temple itself, there's very little talking that goes on. Most of it is sincere, solemn prayer and worship, understanding. There are ceremonies that take place, and you can read all about those ceremonies just to give you a light of some of those. But we have baptismal ceremonies for those who have died without the baptismal ordinance. We perform that for them. We also have other ordinances that are performed for those who have died without them. And in all of these circumstances, we are, and this was one of the 6 things that I talked about as far as getting closer to Christ, serving others. We're serving others as standing in for them and representing them in this life where they couldn't represent themselves. And we're also communing with God. Because it's such a reverent place and a place where we're striving diligently to hear the still small voice, it takes on a special emphasis and a special feeling. Everything that we do in the temple points us toward Christ. There's not one thing that doesn't. And if you were to experience it, you would understand and feel that. In fact, all of the pictures let's see, I'm trying to think of all the painted artwork that's in the temple. It is all about pointing your life toward Christ. So when I go to the temple on a weekly basis, I'm either working there or participating. And when I say participating as a person in one of the ordinances, striving diligently to understand and see, representing someone else, but striving diligently to understand and see Christ in my life. That's the main difference between the two. Is in church, we fellowship with the saints and with God. We point each other toward God. At the temple, whenever we go, we're fellowshipping specifically with God. And so we remain very reverent in the temple. The reason I bring this up is, for me, explaining this to this fellow streaker was really helpful for me. It answered a lot of questions that I had myself in regards to some of the reasons why we remain reverent and silent inside the temple. I never thought about it in the realm in which I explained to her. So this one was very helpful. So as I go through my life and striving diligently to make Christ the center, I make the 6 things that, and I'm going to bring them up again here. Those are the primary things that I do to make him the center. So number 1, prayer. Pray with charity with all purpose, or with all energy of heart. Pray for charity with all energy of heart. Number 2, read the scriptures, at least one verse every single day. And I usually write some insight that I gain from it, trying to understand a little bit more about how I can point my life toward Christ and also to serve my fellow men, which is another one of we'll just bring it up right now, is to serve my fellow men in whatever way that I can. Number 4, so that's 3. Number 4, go to church on a weekly basis. Number 5, fast every month, at least one time a month. And number 6 is to go to the temple regularly. For me, that's weekly. These are the 6 primary ways that I keep Christ the center of my life. Now, there are secondary ways that I keep him the center of my life. However, if ever lacking, if I'm ever finding that I need to refocus, then I got to get back to these 6 central things. Whenever I'm feeling low or depressed, serving someone else, that can bring me out of it. Lily, as I mentioned in the podcast many weeks ago, brought up and said, I wonder how many times Christ was speaking about himself. And what she meant by that was, how often was he turning people to, or how many times was he talking about his own difficulties? I don't know if he ever did. In the scriptures, we don't see it. Mainly, he was spending his time teaching and sharing what he knew to be true and what we could do in order to live our lives in a happy, peaceful way and eventually live with him again. Because that's ultimately what we want to do. I want to live with my wife and our family together forever. And that's one of the promises of the temple as well. One of the highest ordinances that we have in the temple, or the highest ordinance, is to be married for time and all eternity in the temple, which I'm glad that my wife and I did. We were married in the Salt Lake City temple and sealed for time and all eternity, and that was over 32 years ago. So I'm really happy about that. Anyway, and you know that Jamie is with me on about a weekly basis on our podcast as we talk through different things. Hopefully, this has been something that has given you a little bit to think about. I know that it has for me, and I appreciate the opportunity to share it with you. If you want to learn more about streaking or employ it in your life, download the app at the Apple App Store or Google Play. Read the book by buying it at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or anywhere books are sold, or you can download it from Audible and listen to it. If you wouldn't mind subscribing to the podcast, leaving us a rating on the book or the app, I certainly would appreciate it. Until we talk again, keep streaking.